The snowflakes descended through darkness like falling stars, each one catching the amber glow of 10,000 Christmas lights strung across Paneras Park. The December air tasted of cinnamon and wood smoke, of roasted chestnuts and candy canes. Children's laughter echoed between vendor booths selling hot cider and hand-knit scarves. Couples walked arm in arm beneath archways of evergreen and ribbon. Families posed before the enormous spruce tree that stood sentinel at the park's heart, its branches heavy with ornaments that spun slow circles in the winter breeze. But Isla Montgomery sat apart from all of it, trembling in her wheelchair at the edge of the celebration, watching joy unfold around her like a play she'd been uninvited from. She was 24 years old. She wore a red cashmere sweater she'd spent 40 minutes selecting from her closet. Her caramel-colored hair fell in careful curls past her shoulders. She'd used the curling iron for the first time since the accident. Lipstick the shade of winter roses colored her mouth. She'd wanted to feel beautiful tonight, wanted to feel visible, wanted to feel like a woman deserving of love instead of pity. 47 minutes ago, Jared Pierce had looked at her wheelchair and walked away. She could replay the moment in perfect detail, the way trauma brands itself into memory. His smile freezing mid-formation, his gaze dropping from her face to the chrome and rubber beneath her, then jerking back up as if caught doing something shameful, the color draining from his cheeks, the stammered excuse, papers to grade, a sudden emergency. Anything to justify his retreat. He'd set the bouquet of red roses on a stone bench 15 feet away, not in her lap, not in her hands, just there, abandoned on cold granite, an apology he lacked the courage to deliver directly. Isla had remained motionless for 7 full minutes afterward, counting her heartbeats, while strangers pretended not to notice her sitting alone with flowers she couldn't reach. While teenage boys jostled past, their laughter sharp as broken glass, while the cheerful Christmas music played on, oblivious and mocking, the tears hadn't come yet. They were trapped somewhere beneath her sternum, caught behind walls she'd spent 3 years constructing, brick by careful brick. 3 years since the night everything shattered. Isla had been a dancer once, not merely someone who took classes or performed at recitals, but a dancer in the way some people are musicians or painters. It wasn't what she did, it was what she was. Ballet had been her first language, more native than English. Her body had spoken in arabesques and grand jetés, in the perfect arc of a développé, in the impossible suspension of a grand jeté, where for one heartbeat she'd been weightless, flying, free. She'd been a senior at Boston University studying dance and choreography. Already companies in New York and Chicago had expressed interest. Already she'd been planning her future. Small apartment in Brooklyn, auditions, the slow climb toward principal roles. She'd been 21 years old with her whole life choreographed before her. Then came December 14th, the night that divided her existence into before and after. She'd been driving home from rehearsal along the Massachusetts Turnpike. Black ice had formed on a particular curve near Exit 17, a notorious stretch where the highway curved beneath an overpass that blocked the winter sun, where moisture accumulated and froze invisible against dark asphalt. A semi-truck lost traction. The driver overcorrected. Metal shrieked against metal. Glass exploded into diamonds. The world tumbled end over end. When it stopped, Isla couldn't feel her legs. The surgery lasted 11 hours. They installed titanium rods along her spine, fused vertebrae T11 and T12, used words like permanent and paralysis and lucky to be alive, as if those phrases belonged together. 18 months of hospitals and rehabilitation centers followed. Physical therapy that felt like torture. Occupational therapy teaching her to dress herself, transfer from chair to bed, navigate a world designed for bodies that work differently than hers. Psychological therapy for the rage and grief and despair that threatened to drown her nightly. Her legs never moved again, not even a flutter, not even in dreams. For months she'd been furious, screaming, thrashing, throwing objects at anyone who tried to help. She'd cursed God and the universe and the truck driver and the ice and her own treacherous body. She'd refused mirrors, couldn't bear seeing what she'd become. Eventually the fury burned out, leaving only ash and hollow spaces where her dreams used to live. Her parents had begged her to move home, let them care for her. They'd meant well, parents always mean well, but Hila recognized that path. She'd seen the way they watched her, waiting for the inevitable breakdown, treating her like fragile porcelain instead of a person, suffocating her with their loving, terrified protection. 6 months ago, she'd moved into her own place, a modest one-bedroom apartment in Somerville with accessibility modifications, ramps, grab bars, lowered counters. It wasn't much, but it was hers, her independence, her declaration that she remained a whole person, not merely a tragedy requiring constant supervision. Tonight she'd been brave. When her friend Melissa had called about a blind date, Isla had said yes despite every instinct screaming to refuse. Melissa promised Jared was kind, patient, understanding. And yes, Melissa had disclosed the wheelchair. He'd claimed it didn't matter, but it had mattered. It always mattered. Isla finally forced her hands to grip the rubber wheels, pushed herself away from the crowds toward the darker edges of the park, where decorations thinned and shadows thickened. She found relative solitude beneath a cluster of pine trees, their branches sagging with accumulated snow. From here she could still observe the festivities, the carousel with its painted horses, the skating rink where couples glided in graceful circles, the line of children waiting to whisper wishes to Santa. But she felt removed from it all, separated by invisible walls thicker than glass. The cold penetrated her sweater. Her fingers went numb inside her gloves. She'd lost some circulation in her extremities after the accident. Always felt colder than she should, as if her body was slowly forgetting its own boundaries. She thought about the life she was supposed to be living. By now she'd have graduated, maybe joined a company in New York. She'd be dancing core roles, working towards soloist positions, living in a cramped apartment with 3 other dancers, surviving on ramen and ambition. Maybe she'd have a boyfriend, someone who'd fallen in love watching her dance, who understood that art and identity were inseparable. Instead, she was here, alone on Christmas Eve, nursing a rejection confirmed every fear she'd carried since waking up paralyzed. Perhaps her parents were right. Perhaps independence was just another word for loneliness. Perhaps she should stop pretending normal life was possible for someone like her. The tears finally arrived, hot and sudden, streaming down her frozen cheeks. Isla didn't wipe them away. Nobody was watching anyway. She'd learned this truth about disability. People either stared openly or avoided looking entirely. There was rarely middle ground. She closed her eyes, let the sounds wash over her. Children shrieking with delight, bells jingling on vendor booths, someone singing Silent Night slightly off-key. All of it felt impossibly distant, as though she existed in a parallel dimension alongside the real world, but never quite touching it. She didn't know how long she sat there. Time felt elastic lately, stretching during lonely moments, compressing during the rare occasions when she felt almost normal. She was preparing to leave, to wheel herself home through snowy streets, spend Christmas Eve alone with Netflix and leftover takeout like so many other nights. When she felt it, a gentle tug on her sleeve, soft and deliberate. Isla opened her eyes and looked down. A little girl stood beside her chair, perhaps 5 years old, with blonde curls escaping from beneath a pink knitted cap decorated with silver stars. She wore a puffy coat the color of bubblegum, buttons shaped like snowflakes marching down the front. In one small mittened hand, she clutched a candy cane, sticky and half dissolved. The child gazed up at Isla with eyes the impossible blue of winter sky, clear and bright and unmarred by judgment or pity, or the awkwardness adults brought to such encounters. Just pure, uncomplicated curiosity. For a suspended moment, neither spoke. The world seemed to pause, music fading, voices dimming, snowflakes hanging motionless in air. Then the little girl reached out and placed her tiny hand on Isla's knee, the gesture so natural and unself-conscious that something cracked inside Isla's chest, something frozen solid for 3 years, suddenly fracturing. The child tilted her head, studying Isla's face with an intensity that seemed beyond her years. "You're very beautiful," she said, her voice clear as bells. "Like the snow princess in my storybook." Isla blinked, too stunned to respond. When had anyone last called her beautiful? People called her brave now. Strong, inspiring, never beautiful. "Thank you, sweetheart," Isla managed, her voice rough with unshed tears. The little girl's expression grew solemn. "Why are you crying? Did someone hurt you?" The question was so direct, so earnest, that Isla found herself nodding. Yes, someone had hurt her. Many someones over the past 3 years, but especially tonight. Someone had looked at her and decided she wasn't worth the effort. The child considered this gravely, her small face thoughtful in a way that seemed almost ancient. Then she asked the question that would change everything. "Can I hug you?" Mommy used to say, "Hugs fix sad hearts." The words hung crystalline in the frozen air between them. Not pity, not charity, just a child who recognized pain and wanted to help in the only way she knew. Isla's throat closed. She nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness. The little girl stepped closer, carefully navigating the wheelchair's footrests with surprising grace, and wrapped her small arms around Isla's torso. She rested her cheek against Isla's chest, right over her heart, and squeezed with all the strength in her tiny body. It was the purest thing Isla had experienced since the accident. No awkwardness, no silent calculations about what she could or couldn't do, no performative kindness designed to make the giver feel virtuous, just human warmth freely given, no strings attached. Ela wrapped her arms around the child and held on tight, tears flowing freely now. But these tears felt different, like ice cracking in spring thaw, like the first breath after being underwater too long. Something breaking open rather than breaking down. "Thank you," Isla whispered into the child's hair, which smelled of strawberry shampoo and snow. "Thank you so much." The little girl pulled back just enough to look up at Isla, her face solemn and wise. "You're welcome. Hugs always help." Before Isla could respond, she heard footsteps crunching rapidly through snow, and a man's voice calling out, breathless with panic and relief. "Bryn! Bryn! You cannot run off like that." The man who emerged through the falling snow looked like he'd been running hard. His dark hair was dusted white with snowflakes. His breath came in visible clouds. He was tall, easily 6'2", with broad shoulders beneath a black wool coat that probably cost more than Isla's monthly rent. His face was all sharp angles and shadowed planes, but his eyes were storm cloud gray, and they held the same exhaustion Isla saw in her own mirror each morning. The particular weariness of someone who'd survived something unsurvivable. He stopped abruptly when he saw Bryn with Isla, his expression shifting from panic to confusion to something softer. He approached slowly, carefully, kneeling so he was eye level with both of them. "Bryn," he said again, quieter now. "You know you can't wander away from Daddy." I was terrified. "But I found her, Daddy," Bryn said with complete confidence, turning to him. "She was sad, like you get sad." The man's gaze flickered to Isla's face, taking in her red-rimmed eyes, tear-stained cheeks, and something passed across his features. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. I'm so sorry, he said, looking directly at Isla. His voice was deep and quiet, the kind that didn't need volume to carry weight. My daughter has a gift for finding people who need kindness. I'm Elias Hartwell. He extended his hand. And you've already met Bryn. Isla shook his hand. His grip was warm and firm, nothing tentative about it. Isla Montgomery. Rough night? The question was casual, human, without the careful pity strangers usually employed. Isla found herself almost smiling despite everything. You could say that. Blind date that went spectacularly wrong. Something dark flickered across Elias's face. Then he's an idiot. His loss. Two simple words, but the way he said them, matter of fact, not placating, made them feel true. Bryn, still holding Isla's hand, looked up at her father with the determination only 5-year-olds possess. Can we walk together, Daddy? I want to show Miss Isla the lights. Elias raised an eyebrow at Isla. Only if Miss Isla wants company. We don't want to intrude on her evening. Isla glanced around the park, at the couples and families, at the life happening all around her that had felt so impossibly separate just moments ago. Then she looked at Bryn's hopeful face, at those clear blue eyes that saw her as simply a person worth knowing. I'd like that very much, she heard herself say. What followed was the strangest, most beautiful 2 hours of Isla's recent life. They wandered through the Christmas market, Elias walking, Ela wheeling, Bryn skipping between them like a small pink comet. Bryn pointed out every decoration with the enthusiasm only children possess, exclaiming over light displays and ornaments, and the mechanical reindeer that nodded its head every 45 seconds. Elias walked beside Isola's chair at a pace that never felt rushed. He didn't walk ahead and wait impatiently for her to catch up the way some people did. He didn't offer to push without asking first. He simply walked alongside her, present and patient. They stopped at a booth selling hot chocolate, the real kind made with melted dark chocolate, topped with fresh whipped cream and crushed peppermint. They stood beneath a heat lamp while Bryn chattered about her ballet class, about her teacher, Miss Caroline, about the upcoming recital where she'd perform as a snowflake. Do you like dancing, Miss Isla? Bryn asked, her face chocolate smudged and earnest. Isla's heart contracted painfully. She glanced at Elias, expecting pity or discomfort, but he was simply watching her with those steady gray eyes, waiting without pressure. I used to dance, Isla said carefully. A long time ago. Ballet, actually. Bryn's eyes went wide. Really? Like a real ballerina? Yes, I was studying to become a professional dancer. What happened? The question was innocent, without cruelty, just a child's straightforward curiosity. Elias's hand moved slightly as if to stop Bryn. But Isla shook her head slightly. It was okay. I was in a car accident. My legs don't work anymore. Bryn considered this, swinging her legs where she perched on a nearby bench. That's sad, but Miss Caroline says dancing isn't just your feet. She says dancing is in your heart, so you can still be a dancer, right? Out of the mouths of babes. Wisdom children spoke without understanding its profound weight. Your teacher is very wise, Isla managed past the lump in her throat. Elias set down his cup, his voice quiet. Bryn's right, you know. I'm an architect. Most buildings I design will never be built exactly as I envision them. Budget constraints, zoning issues, client changes. But the creation itself, the vision, that's still real. That still matters. Isla looked at him properly for the first time. Really looked. She saw the expensive coat and the designer watch, the quiet confidence that came with professional success. But she also saw the shadows beneath his eyes, the tightness around his mouth, the way his smiles never quite reached those gray depths. What brought you out tonight? She asked. Christmas Eve at a holiday market doesn't seem like typical architect entertainment. Something painful flickered across Elias's face. He glanced at Bryn, who was absorbed in fishing marshmallows from her hot chocolate, then back at Isla. "My wife died 3 years ago tonight," he said quietly, "on the Massachusetts Turnpike. Same road where you probably had your accident." Isla's breath caught. "I'm so sorry." Adrian was an architect, too. We met at MIT, fell in love over late-night design reviews. He paused, watching Bryn with fierce tenderness. "She died coming home from the hospital. Bryn had pneumonia. She was only 2. Adrian had been awake for 48 hours straight. She fell asleep at the wheel on that curve near exit 17. The exact curve where Isla's life had ended and begun simultaneously. That stretch kills people," Isla said softly. "Black ice forms there even when the rest of the highway is clear. I've thought about it 1,000 times. Why that curve? Why that night?" "So have I." Elias's voice was rough. "For months I tortured myself. If I'd gone to the hospital instead, if I'd insisted she rest, if, if. They stood in silence for a moment, two people bound by the same stretch of treacherous asphalt, by the same before and after division of their lives. "Bryn doesn't really remember her mother," Elias continued. "She was so young. Sometimes she tells me about mommy's hugs or mommy songs, and his voice caught. "I think those might just be my hugs she remembers, my songs. But I don't have the heart to tell her." Isla felt tears prick her eyes again. "Maybe they are your wife's hugs. Through you. Maybe love works like that, passing through people, changing shape but never really dying." Elias looked at her, really looked at her, and something profound passed between them. A recognition of shared loss, of understanding what it meant to have your life cleaved in two, to carry grief like a second skeleton beneath your skin. "That's a beautiful way to think of it," he said softly. "Thank you." They continued through the market, but the conversation deepened. Elias told her about the years since Adrienne's death, throwing himself into work, winning prestigious awards while feeling hollow inside, focusing so intensely on giving Bryn a normal childhood that he'd forgotten how to have his own life. Isla, in turn, found herself discussing things she rarely spoke about: the hospital, the rehabilitation, the slow, agonizing process of learning to exist in a body that wouldn't cooperate. The way her dreams had died, not all at once but slowly, one small death compounding into another until the accumulation became unbearable. "People don't understand," she said as they reached the nativity scene at the park's far end, a quiet corner with hand-carved wooden figures and soft lantern light. "They think the hard part is learning to use a wheelchair. But that's not it. The hard part is learning to live with being looked at differently, being treated like you're fundamentally less than you were before." Elias nodded slowly. "After Adrian died, people treated me differently too. Like I was made of glass. Like I might shatter if they said the wrong thing. Eventually I realized I'd rather be alone than be handled with kid gloves." "Yes," Isla breathed. "Exactly that. That's exactly it." They stood in companionable silence, watching Bryn examine the wooden figures with intense concentration. The snow continued falling, softer now, like a benediction. "Can I ask something personal?" Elias said finally. "When did your accident happen?" "December 14th, 3 years ago." His head whipped toward her. "The same night?" "The same night, the same road, the same curve probably." For a long moment, Elias just stared, and Isla could see him processing the impossible symmetry. Two lives shattered on the same stretch of highway on the same night. Two survivors meeting 3 years later in a Christmas market because a 5-year-old girl asked for a hug. "Then you understand," he said quietly. "The way people look at you after, like you're broken beyond repair." "Like I'm less than I was," Isla agreed. "But you're not." The certainty in his voice surprised her. "You're different, changed. but different doesn't mean less. Isla felt something warm bloom in her chest, something frozen solid for so long she'd forgotten it could exist. Hope, maybe, or possibility, or the dangerous, terrifying thought that perhaps her story wasn't finished after all. The market was beginning to close. Vendors packed up booths, families headed toward parking lots, lights dimming section by section. Nearly midnight, and Isla realized with shock that she'd been with Elias and Bryn for over 2 hours. "We should let you get home," Elias said, though he didn't sound eager to leave. "Daddy," Bryn tugged on his coat, "can Miss Isla be our friend? Please." Elias smiled, a real smile this time, reaching his eyes and transforming his entire face. He looked at Isla. "Can I see you again? Bryn would love it. And honestly, I would too." Isla hesitated. This felt dangerous, like opening a door she'd kept locked, like stepping onto ice that might crack beneath her weight. "I don't want pity," she said quietly. "This isn't pity." Elias pulled out his phone. "Tonight is the first time since Adrian died that I didn't feel like a ghost walking through my own life. That's not pity. That's gratitude." They exchanged numbers. Bryn hugged Isla again, her small arms fierce and warm. "Will you be my friend?" the little girl asked. Isla felt tears threaten once more. "I would love that, Bryn." As they walked away, Elias's hand resting protectively on Bryn's shoulder, their footprints slowly disappearing under fresh snow. Isla sat alone again. But this time the aloneness felt different, like a pause rather than an ending, like the silence between musical movements instead of the silence after the final note. She looked up at the falling snow, at the last remaining Christmas lights, and felt something she hadn't felt since before the accident. Hope. The days following Christmas unfolded like a dream Isla was terrified of waking from. Elias texted Christmas morning. "Bryn wanted me to tell you Merry Christmas. She's already asking when we can see you again." Isla stared at her phone for 5 full minutes before responding, "Merry Christmas to you both. Thank you for last night. It saved me." The messages came daily after that. Never intrusive, never demanding. Just gentle check-ins. Photos of Bryn's crayon drawings. Questions about Isla's day. Small kindnesses that accumulated into something larger. 2 days after Christmas, they met for coffee at a cafe near Harvard Square with wide aisles and accessible seating. They talked for 4 hours, losing track of time, only realizing how long when the barista started stacking chairs. Then came the park visits. Elias would text, "Bryn wants to feed the ducks. Want to join us?" And Isla would say yes, despite every instinct screaming that this couldn't last, that eventually Elias would realize what everyone else did, that she was too much work, too complicated, too broken. But Elias never seemed to notice her disability as anything more than a practical consideration. He'd check if venues were accessible the way anyone might check hours of operation. He never made a big production of holding doors or moving chairs. He just existed alongside her, treating her like a person instead of a problem. By late January, they were seeing each other 3 or 4 times a week. Elias brought her to his office in early February, a converted warehouse in the Seaport district with exposed brick walls and massive windows overlooking Boston Harbor. His firm, Hartwell Design, specialized in sustainable urban architecture. The walls displayed blueprints and renderings, scale models arranged on every surface. "I'm working on something new," Elias said, leading her to a conference table where a large model sat covered with cloth. "A community arts center, but I'm struggling with the accessibility design. Everything feels either too institutional or not functional enough." He pulled back the cloth, revealing an intricate 3-story building model with an open courtyard. "I need perspective," Elias said, looking at her intently, "from someone who actually lives with these considerations every day, someone who knows what works and what's just aesthetic theater." Isla felt something shift in her chest. He wasn't asking out of pity or charity. He was asking because her experience had value, because her perspective mattered professionally. I'd need to see the full plans, she said slowly. Understand spatial flow between rooms. Check sight lines, turning radiuses, material choices, door weights. Whatever you need. Elias was already pulling up files. I can pay standard consulting fees. Let's start with volunteer, Isla interrupted. If I'm actually helpful, we can discuss compensation later. What began as one afternoon of consultation evolved into weeks of collaboration. Isla visited the office twice weekly, reviewing plans, making suggestions, sometimes completely redesigning elements that looked accessible on paper but would be nightmares in practice. She found herself energized in ways she hadn't experienced since before the accident. This was purpose. This was using her intelligence, her hard-won knowledge, her lived experience to create something meaningful. On Valentine's Day, Elias appeared at her apartment with flowers, not roses. He'd remembered her saying roses felt tainted after the blind date disaster. Instead, he brought white lilies, elegant and understated. Because you deserve something as unique as you are, he said simply. They went to dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant in the North End. Over candlelight and linguine, they talked about childhood dreams and adult realities, about the ways life surprised you in both terrible and wonderful directions. When Elias walked Isla back to her apartment, they stood in the doorway for a long moment. Snow was falling again. It always seemed to be snowing during their important moments, and the street lights cast everything in soft, golden luminescence. I'm glad I met you, Elias said quietly. I'm glad Bryn ran off that night. So am I, Isla whispered. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she didn't want to. She reached up, her hand finding the back of his neck, and pulled him closer. The kiss was soft, tender. It tasted like wine and possibility, and all the lonely nights they'd both survived to reach this moment. When they pulled apart, Elias rested his forehead against hers. I haven't done this since Adrienne, he said. I'm probably terrible at it. Isla laughed, surprising herself. I haven't done this since the accident. I think we're both out of practice. Then we'll figure it out together. For those perfect 6 weeks, Isla allowed herself to believe in fairy tales again. Allowed herself to believe that maybe happy endings existed even for broken people. Maybe especially for broken people. She should have known the storm was coming. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning in early March. Isla was at Elias's office, reviewing updated plans for the Arts Center, when Constance Hartwell arrived unannounced. Elias's mother was a striking woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into an elegant chignon and the ramrod posture of someone raised on boarding school discipline. She wore a camel coat that probably cost more than Isla's car had before the accident, and carried herself with the quiet authority of inherited wealth and social position. Her eyes, the same storm gray as Elias's, swept over Isla with clinical precision, taking in the wheelchair, the casual jeans and sweater, the coffee cup from the cafe down the street. In those few seconds, Isla felt herself assessed, measured, and found lacking. Mother, Elias said, standing quickly. I didn't know you were stopping by. Clearly, Constance's voice was cultured, each word precisely articulated. I called your assistant. She mentioned you were here with a consultant. The way she said consultant made it sound vaguely disreputable. This is Isla Montgomery, Elias said, his hand moving to rest on Isla's shoulder. A gesture of solidarity Constance definitely noticed. She's been invaluable with the accessibility design for the Arts Center. Isla, this is my mother, Constance Hartwell. Mrs. Hartwell. Isla extended her hand, determined not to be cowed. Constance shook it briefly, her grip perfunctory. How thoughtful of my son to consult with someone with first-hand experience. The pause before someone was deliberate and cutting. Isla's insights have transformed the project, Elias said, his voice taking on an edge Isla hadn't heard before. The building is better because of her. I'm sure. Constance smiled without warmth. Elias, might I have a word? In private? What followed was a tense 15-minute wait while Isla sat alone in the conference room, trying not to imagine the conversation happening behind Elias's closed office door. She could hear raised voices, Elias's patient but firm, Constance's sharp and insistent, but couldn't make out words. When Elias emerged, his jaw was tight, his expression carefully neutral. I apologize for that, he said, sitting down heavily. My mother can be protective. She doesn't like me. She doesn't know you. But his tone suggested he understood that wasn't the real issue. 3 days later, Isla received a phone call from an unknown number. Miss Montgomery, this is Constance Hartwell. I was hoping we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. There are things I think we should discuss. Every instinct told Isla to decline, but she'd learned over 3 years of brutal physical therapy that sometimes the hardest thing was also the necessary thing. They met the next day at an upscale cafe on Newbury Street, all white marble and artisanal espresso. Constance was already seated when Isla arrived, perfectly composed in a cream-colored suit that screamed old money. Thank you for coming, Constance said, gesturing to the seat across from her. I took the liberty of ordering you a latte. I hope that's acceptable. The coffee sat cooling between them, a pretense of civility neither believed. I'll be direct, Miss Montgomery. Constance folded her hands on the table. My son has endured tremendous loss. So has my granddaughter. I'm sure you can understand why I'm concerned about their well-being. Concerned about what, exactly? About Elias becoming attached to someone whose situation might complicate an already difficult life. There it was, the thing everyone thought but rarely voiced. You mean someone in a wheelchair, Isla said flatly. I mean someone with significant challenges. My son lost his wife on the same road where you had your accident. He spent 2 years in therapy for depression and anxiety. Bryn still has nightmares about her mother. They're finally healing, and now I'm a problem. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Isla's hands gripped her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles went white. Let me guess the script. You're worried I'm too much work. That Elias will have to take care of me on top of everything else. That I'm not whole enough, healthy enough, good enough for your son. Constance's expression remained maddeningly calm. I'm worried about what happens when things get difficult. When Bryn needs something you can't provide. When Elias has to choose between caring for you or his daughter. Each word landed like a slap, finding every vulnerable place and striking hard. These were Isla's own deepest fears, spoken aloud by this elegant stranger. I don't need taking care of, Isla said, her voice shaking. Perhaps not now. But wheelchairs break down. Health complications arise. I'm not trying to be cruel, Miss Montgomery. I'm trying to protect my family from further heartbreak. By telling me I'm not good enough for them? By asking you to consider whether this relationship is fair to anyone involved. Isla left the cafe feeling gutted. Every insecurity she'd ever had about her disability came roaring back. Maybe Constance was right. Maybe she was selfish to think she could have this. Have Elias, have Bryn, have a chance at happiness that didn't hurt the people she was growing to love. She stopped answering Elias's texts. Let his calls go to voicemail. When Bryn sent a crayon drawing through Elias's phone, 3 stick figures labeled Daddy, Bryn, and Miss Isla, Isla cried for 2 hours before hiding it in a drawer where she wouldn't have to see it. 2 weeks crawled past. 2 weeks of Isla telling herself this was for the best, that she was protecting Elias and Bryn from the inevitable complications and burdens she'd bring to their lives. But the lie tasted bitter. On the 15th day, someone knocked on her apartment door. Not Elias, His knock was distinctive, a rhythmic pattern Bryn had taught him. This was different, tentative. When Isla opened the door, Jared Pierce stood in the hallway holding 2 coffee cups. "Melissa told me you'd be home," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Can I come in? Just for 5 minutes?" Against every instinct, Isla let him in. They sat in her small living room, Jared on the couch, Isla in her wheelchair maintaining careful distance, while uncomfortable silence stretched between them. "I've been thinking about that night for 3 months," Jared finally said. "About what I did, how I ran. And I need to tell you I'm sorry." "It's fine," Isla said automatically, the words hollow. "It's not fine." Jared leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "My sister had a car accident 6 weeks ago. She broke her back. She's paralyzed from the waist down. She's in a wheelchair now." Isla's breath caught. "And suddenly I'm the one helping her, pushing her chair, watching people react to her the way I reacted to you." His voice cracked. "Watching her cry because a guy she liked took one look at her chair and walked away. And I realized, God, I realized that was me. I did that to you. I'm the asshole in her story." Tears streamed down his face. "I came here because I'm so ashamed I can barely look at myself in the mirror." "You deserved better. My sister deserves better. And I didn't understand any of it until it was someone I love." He looked at her directly. "Melissa said there's a guy, someone who actually sees you, someone who doesn't run. Please, please, don't let what I did convince you that's not what you deserve. Don't let my cowardice make you push him away." After Jared left, Isla sat alone with his words echoing through her mind. She thought about Elias and Bryn, about the way they'd made her feel seen, valued, fully human. She thought about Constance's fears and her own fears, and all the ways fear could masquerade as wisdom, when really it was just cowardice dressed up in reasonable clothes. She made a decision. She called Constance. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Isla Montgomery. I think we should talk again. At your home this time, if you're willing." Constance's townhouse in Beacon Hill was exactly what Isla expected. Red brick with black shutters, brass fixtures polished to a mirror shine, window boxes that would overflow with flowers come spring. Inside was all hardwood floors and oriental rugs, antique furniture and oil paintings, generations of accumulated wealth displayed with tasteful understatement. Constance led her to a sitting room overlooking a small garden, currently buried under snow. She poured tea from a silver service, the ritual clearly second nature. "Thank you for agreeing to see me again," Isla said once they were settled. "I wasn't certain you would call." Constance handed her a delicate china cup. "I need to tell you something about how your daughter-in-law died. About that stretch of highway." Constance's hand stilled on the teapot. "I know how Adrian died. You know the facts, but I don't think you understand what it means." Isla took a breath. "I drive past that section of the turnpike sometimes. I shouldn't. It terrifies me every time. But I do it because I need to remember. That curve near exit 17 where the highway passes under the overpass? Black ice forms there when the rest of the road is clear. The overpass blocks sunlight. Moisture accumulates. It's a death trap." She met Constance's eyes directly. "Adrienne didn't die because she was exhausted from caring for Bryn. She died because that road is poorly designed and kills people. It killed her. It nearly killed me. It's killed dozens of others over the years. Being tired might have been a factor, but that accident wasn't about her loving too much or burning herself out. It was about bad luck meeting bad infrastructure." Constance's eyes were suddenly bright with unshed tears. "You're trying to protect Elias from more loss," Isla continued quietly. "I understand that impulse. I respect it even. But Mrs. Hartwell, I've already survived the worst thing that could happen to me. I spent 18 months in hospitals learning to exist in a body that wouldn't cooperate. I've been rejected more times than I can count. I've had to fight for every single thing I want in life. She leaned forward. I'm not going to burn out. I'm not going to be too proud to ask for help when I need it. Because I've learned, the hard way, that needing help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. I know my limitations. I know when to ask for support. And I'm strong enough to carry my own weight while being smart enough to admit when I need someone to share the load. Constance dabbed at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. I watched my son crumble when Adrian died. I watched him become a shell of the person he'd been. I listened to him sob at 3 in the morning. I can't watch him go through that again. Then help me make sure he doesn't have to, Isla said simply. Help me be strong enough for both of us when we need it. Don't push me away. Teach me how to be part of this family. Because Mrs. Hartwell, I'm falling in love with your son, and I already love your granddaughter, and I will fight like hell to protect them both, including from my own limitations. For a long moment, Constance just studied her, really looked at her, seeing past the wheelchair to the person beneath. Then slowly, something in her expression softened. You're braver than I gave you credit for, she said finally. I've had a lot of practice being brave. It was either that or give up entirely. Constance smiled, a real smile this time, sad but genuine. Adrienne would have liked you. She had that same steel underneath the softness, that same refusal to let circumstances define her. They talked for another hour. Constance told stories about Adrian, about Elias as a young man full of dreams, about her own fears and regrets after her husband's death 15 years prior. And Isla, for the first time, felt like she might actually have a chance at being part of this complicated, grieving, beautiful family. When Isla prepared to leave, Constance stopped her at the door. Miss Montgomery, Isla, I owe you an apology for the assumptions I made, for the way I approached this situation. You were protecting your family, I understand that. Yes, but perhaps, Constance's voice softened. Perhaps you could be family too, if you're willing to tolerate a difficult mother-in-law. Isla felt tears threaten. I'd like that very much. That evening, Isla finally responded to Elias's text. Can you come over? We need to talk. He arrived within 20 minutes, breathless and worried. When she opened the door, his expression was a mixture of hope and fear. I'm sorry, Isla said before he could speak. I'm sorry I shut you out. I was scared. Scared of what? Scared your mother was right. Scared I'd be too much for you. Scared you'd wake up one day and realize you made a mistake. Elias stepped inside, closing the door behind him. You want to know what scares me? Losing you. Living the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to fight for this. That's what terrifies me. He took her hands. I'm not looking for easy, Isla. I'm looking for real. And this, this is the most real thing I've felt in 3 years. Isla pulled him down into a kiss that tasted like tears and relief and second chances. I talked to your mother today, she said when they broke apart. Really talked. I think we might be okay. Elias laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. If you manage to win over my mother, you can survive anything. They spent the evening on her couch talking through everything. The fears, the hopes, the practical realities of building a life together. It wasn't perfect or easy, but it was honest. And honesty, Isla was learning, was the foundation everything else was built on. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening in late March, Isla was home making dinner when her phone rang. Elias's name flashed on the screen, and she answered with a smile. But the voice that came through was wrong, raw and broken and barely holding together. Isla, it's Bryn. She collapsed at school. We're at Children's Hospital. She needs emergency surgery. They think her heart. His voice shattered. Can you come, please? I'm already on my way. Text me the room number. The ride to the hospital felt endless. Isla's hands shook as she directed the Uber driver, as she navigated through the hospital's maze of corridors, as she followed signs to the pediatric intensive care unit. She found Elias pacing outside a room, his face gray with terror. When he saw her, something in him broke. He dropped to his knees beside her wheelchair and buried his face in her lap, his whole body shaking with silent sobs. They said her heart valve, the one they fixed when she was 2. It's failing, he gasped out. They have to operate tonight, but the surgeon said there are risks, complications. She's so small, Isla. She's so small and I can't lose her. Isla wrapped her arms around him, holding him together while he fell apart. She's strong. She's your daughter. She's strong like you. And we won't lose her. We won't. I'm so scared. Me too. But we're scared together. You're not alone in this. A nurse emerged from the room. Mr. Hartwell, Bryn is asking for you. And she glanced at Isla. She's asking for Miss Isla, too. They went in together. Bryn looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, dwarfed by machines and monitors, an oxygen cannula in her nose. But when she saw Isla, her face lit up with that familiar smile. You came, she whispered, her voice weak but happy. Isla rolled close to the bedside, taking Bryn's small hand in hers. Of course I came, sweetheart. I'll always come when you need me. I'm scared, Miss Isla. My chest hurts. I know, baby, but the doctors are going to fix it. They're going to make you better. Will you be here when I wake up? Bryn's eyes were huge, pleading. Promise? Isla felt her throat close. She looked at Elias, saw her own fear reflected in his eyes, and then looked back at this brave little girl who'd saved her life 3 months ago with a simple hug. I promise, Bryn, I'll be right here. I'm not going anywhere. The surgery took 7 hours. Isla and Elias sat together in the surgical waiting room, not talking much, just existing in the same terrified space. They held hands. They drank terrible coffee. They stared at the clock that seemed to move both too fast and too slow. Constance arrived 2 hours into the surgery, her usual composure cracking when she saw them huddled together. She sat on Isla's other side and, after a moment's hesitation, took her hand. Thank you for being here, Constance said quietly, for both of them. There's nowhere else I would be. At hour 4, a nurse came out with an update. The surgery is going well, but it's complex. Dr. Patterson wanted you to know everything is proceeding as planned, but it will take longer than initially estimated. At hour 6, Elias broke down completely, and Isla held him while he cried years of accumulated fear and grief. I can't do this again, he sobbed. I can't lose another person I love. I can't survive it. You won't have to, Isla said fiercely. She's going to be okay. She has to be okay. Constance wiped her own tears, then stood and walked to the window, her shoulders shaking. Finally, after 7 hours and 43 minutes, the surgical team doors opened. Dr. Patterson emerged, still in her scrubs, pulling off her surgical cap. They all stood as one. The surgery went well, Dr. Patterson said, and Isla felt Elias sag against her. We were able to repair the valve and reinforce the surrounding tissue. Her heart rhythm is stable. She's being moved to pediatric ICU now. But she's okay. Elias's voice cracked. She's going to be okay? She'll need careful monitoring and follow-up procedures as she grows. But yes, Mr. Hartwell, your daughter is going to be okay. Elias broke down completely then, and both Isla and Constance held him up while he cried with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. When they were finally allowed to see Bryn, she was groggy from anesthesia, but smiling weakly. You kept your promise, she mumbled when she saw Isla. You're here. I'll always keep my promises to you, sweetheart. Always. Bryn's eyes drifted closed, then opened again. Miss Isla, can you be my mommy? My real mommy. The world stopped. Isla felt tears pour down her face. She looked at Elias, saw the same tears streaming down his cheeks, and looked back at this incredible little girl who changed her entire life. I would be honored, Bryn, so honored. Bryn smiled and drifted back to sleep, her small hand still holding tight to Isla's. The snow fell soft and steady over Pinnerest Park, just as it had 1 year ago on the night Isla Montgomery's life changed forever. But everything was different now. The park was crowded with people bundled against the December cold. But today they were here for a specific reason. Today was the grand opening of the Adrienne Hartwell Community Arts Center, 3 stories of accessible, inclusive space designed for artists of all abilities. Isla stood, well, sat before the building's main entrance, beside the enormous red ribbon stretched across the doorway. She wore a navy blue dress that Constance had helped her choose, her caramel hair styled elegantly. On her left finger, a diamond ring caught the winter sunlight. Beside her stood Elias, devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. And between them, holding the oversized ceremonial scissors, stood Bryn, now 6 years old, healthy and glowing, wearing a pink coat that echoed the one from that first magical night. Slightly behind them, Constance beamed with pride that had nothing to do with her family name on the building and everything to do with the family standing before her. The crowd quieted as Isla leaned toward the microphone. 1 year ago, she began, her voice steady and clear, I sat alone in this park, convinced my life was over. Convinced I had nothing left to offer the world. Convinced that disability meant I was less than, broken, unworthy of love or purpose. She glanced at Bryn, who squeezed her hand. Then a little girl asked if she could hug me, and that hug changed everything. The crowd listened, rapt. This building exists because of many people's vision and generosity, but it exists because we believe, all of us involved in this project believe, that art belongs to everyone. That disability doesn't mean inability. That different doesn't mean less. That every person deserves spaces designed with them in mind, not as an afterthought. She looked up at the building, at the large windows on the second floor where a sign read, Isla Montgomery Adaptive Dance Studio, in elegant letters. This center is named for Adrienne Hartwell, a brilliant architect who believed buildings should serve people, not the other way around. I never met her, but I truly hope, she would be proud of what we've created here. Isla looked at Elias, at this man who'd seen her not as a project or problem, but simply as herself. He smiled, his gray eyes warm with love. Bryn, Isla said, would you like to do the honors? Bryn raised the scissors, positioning them carefully on the ribbon. On 3, 1, 2, 3. The ribbon fell away, and the doors opened wide. The crowd surged forward to explore, and for the next hour, Isla and Elias gave tours, answered questions, accepted congratulations. People marveled at the thoughtful design, the dance studio with adjustable equipment, the art rooms with height-flexible workstations, the performance hall with sight lines that worked for everyone. As the afternoon waned and the crowd thinned, Elias touched Isla's arm. There's one more thing. Before we leave, he knelt beside her wheelchair. And Isla's heart began to race, even though she knew what was coming. 1 year ago, Elias said, his voice carrying to the remaining guests who'd gathered close, my daughter asked if she could hug you. That hug brought you into our lives. Today I'm asking if I can love you forever. He pulled out the ring he'd shown her privately 2 months ago, a simple platinum band with a diamond that caught the late afternoon light. Isla Montgomery, will you marry me? Will you officially become Bryn's mother and my wife? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you are the strongest, most remarkable person I've ever known? Isla was crying, happy tears this time, joyful tears. Yes, God, yes, 1,000 times, yes. The remaining crowd erupted in applause as Elias slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her deeply. Bryn launched herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around them both. You're going to be my real mommy now. Forever and ever. Forever and ever, Isla whispered, holding this little girl who'd saved her life, who'd seen her when everyone else looked away, who'd asked one simple question that changed everything. Constance approached, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, smiling through tears. Welcome to the family, daughter. Officially. As the sun set and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the four of them stood together outside the Arts Center. This building that represented hope and second chances and the belief that broken things could become beautiful again. Snow began to fall, just as it had 1 year ago, because it always seemed to snow during the important moments. Isla looked at her new family, at Elias with his arm around her, at Bryn holding both their hands, at Constance standing close, and felt something settle in her chest that had been fractured for so long. Wholeness, peace, home. Later that evening, after the celebration had ended and the park had emptied, the four of them walked and rolled back to the enormous Christmas tree where everything had begun. Do you remember standing here last year? Elias asked quietly. I remember sitting here, Isla corrected with a smile, crying, alone, convinced I'd never be anything but broken. You were never broken, Bryn said seriously, with that wisdom beyond her years. You were just sad, and you needed a hug. Isla pulled Bryn onto her lap, wrapping her arms around her daughter. Her daughter, what a beautiful word that was, and held her tight. You're absolutely right, sweetheart. I just needed a hug, and someone brave enough to give it to me. They stood there together as the snow continued falling, as the Christmas lights twinkled overhead, as the world turned on its axis and carried them forward into their new life. And somewhere in the winter night, Isla could almost hear it, that small, pure voice asking the question that had saved them all. Can I hug you? Yes, Isla thought, looking at her family, her real, actual family. Yes, always and forever. Yes. Sometimes the worst nights of your life are doorways to your best ones. Sometimes love arrives in the form of a 5-year-old girl with a candy cane and a pure heart. Sometimes being broken open is the only way to let the light back in. And sometimes, just sometimes, happy endings are real.